The newspaper clipping is yellowed now, 21 years old, but I still keep it folded in my wallet. Local woman presumed dead after lake accident. There's a photo of me from our wedding day, smiling in white satin, completely unaware that I'd one day orchestrate my own disappearance to escape the very man standing beside me in that picture. I'm Hazel, though that's not the name I go by anymore. And before you judge me too harshly for what I did, let me tell you how I got to that desperate place where drowning seemed like my only way out. It started innocently enough. I was 24, working as a marketing coordinator for a small company in Portland, Oregon. The year was 2002, and I thought I had life figured out. I lived in a studio apartment with plants I managed to keep alive and a cat named Fitzgerald, who judged me silently from his perch on the windowsill. My job wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. I landed a few major accounts, convinced doctors to stock our newer medications, and had even been invited to present at a regional conference. My boss, Margaret, kept mentioning promotions and raises, painting a picture of a future where I might actually make something of myself. That's when I met Randolph. Randy was 32, a successful business consultant who wore expensive suits and drove a BMW that he washed every Sunday without fail. We met at a networking event downtown, one of those awkward mixers where everyone clutches wine glasses and exchanges business cards like playing cards. I was there reluctantly, having been voluntold by Margaret to expand our professional network. Randy approached me by the cheese table, commenting on my choice of brie over cheddar. A woman of sophisticated tastes, he said, and I actually laughed despite myself. He had this way of making me feel like I was the most fascinating woman in the room, even when the room was full of people far more accomplished than I was. He'd lean in close when I talked, his cologne mixing with the scent of whatever wine he'd ordered for us, and I'd feel like I was living in a romance novel. "You're different, Hazel," he told me on our fourth date, reaching across the table at this fancy Italian restaurant downtown. "Most women your age are so scattered, but you know what you want." I didn't, actually, but I nodded anyway, charmed by his confidence in me. The courtship was whirlwind. Randy had opinions about everything: which restaurants were worth visiting, which neighborhoods were up and coming, which people were worth our time. He knew the maitre d' at every decent restaurant in Portland, had season tickets to the theater, could discuss wine with the sommelier at places I couldn't afford to look at. I found it refreshing after years of wishy-washy college boyfriends who couldn't decide what to order for lunch, let alone where they wanted to be in 10 years. Within 6 months, I'd essentially moved into his penthouse apartment in the Pearl District. Within a year, he was suggesting I didn't need to work so hard, that I could scale back my hours and let him take care of me. It felt romantic at the time, this idea that someone wanted to protect me from the stress of corporate life. We married 18 months later in a ceremony that cost more than my annual salary. Randy insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests about the expense. 300 guests at the Portland Art Museum, flowers flown in from Ecuador, a 7-piece band, and a dress that required its own insurance policy. "I want to give you the wedding you deserve," he said, and I melted like butter on hot toast. My mother, practical as always, pulled me aside during the reception. "Honey, this is all very nice, but don't you think it's a bit much? You barely know each other's families." But I was drunk on love and champagne, and the idea that someone thought I was worth all this effort. I dismissed her concerns with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly wrong about anything important. The first few years weren't terrible. We bought a house in Lake Oswego with a mortgage that made me nervous, but Randy assured me his business was thriving. The house was everything I'd dreamed of as a kid growing up in my parents' modest ranch home. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard big enough for the children we planned to have. I quit my job 6 months after the wedding. Randy convinced me it was the practical thing to do. We were trying to get pregnant, and someone needed to manage our increasingly complex social calendar. The company threw me a goodbye party, and Margaret actually teared up when she handed me my final paycheck. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "You're too good at this to give it up." but I was already picturing myself as a society wife, hosting dinner parties and volunteering for worthy causes. I'd gotten a taste of Randy's world, charity galas and country club brunches, and I wanted more of it. I got pregnant with Luna when I was 26, and then Jake followed 2 years later. Randy was a devoted father in his way. He never missed a school play or soccer game, always had the best equipment for whatever sport the kids were trying. Luna's nursery looked like something from a magazine, complete with a custom mural of fairy tale characters. Jake's room was themed around trains, with a working model railroad that Randy spent entire weekends perfecting. But somewhere along the way, that attentiveness I'd found so charming began to feel suffocating. "Hazel, why are you wearing that dress?" he'd ask, when I came downstairs ready for dinner with friends. "The blue one would be more flattering. You know how important tonight is for my business." "I thought we agreed you'd stop working once Jake started school," he'd say, when I mentioned wanting to go back to my career. "The kids need their mother at home. Besides, what would people think if they knew I couldn't provide for my family?" "Did you really think it was appropriate to disagree with me in front of the Hendersons?" he'd ask after dinner parties, his voice calm, but his eyes cold. "We need to present a united front. My reputation depends on it." I started second-guessing every decision, every outfit, every conversation. The woman who'd once felt confident enough to give presentations to pharmaceutical executives began asking permission to buy groceries at a different store. I'd stand in my walk-in closet for 20 minutes every morning, trying to anticipate what Randy would approve of, what would make him smile instead of sigh. The isolation was gradual but complete. My college friends drifted away after I canceled too many coffee dates. My work friends stopped calling after I turned down too many invitations. Even my relationship with my parents became strained. Randy always had a reason why we couldn't visit, why they couldn't stay over, why family dinners needed to be kept short. "Your mother has strong opinions about everything," he'd say. "It's not healthy for the children to see that kind of conflict." But it was the money that became the real prison. Randy handled all our finances. I had a household account with a modest allowance, but every expense over $50 required his approval. When I wanted to take a pottery class at the community center, he questioned whether it was really necessary. When Luna needed new clothes, he scrutinized every receipt like he was conducting an audit. "I'm not trying to control you," he'd say when I brought it up. "I'm trying to be responsible. You don't see the big picture like I do. Running a business, managing investments, planning for the future. It's more complex than you realize." The big picture, as it turned out, was that Randy was leveraging our house, our cars, our entire life to fund his increasingly risky business ventures. I discovered this purely by accident when I answered a call from a collection agency looking for him. "Mrs. Sinclair, this is Amanda from Premier Recovery Services. We've been trying to reach your husband regarding his overdue account." "There must be some mistake," I told the woman on the phone. "My husband's business is doing very well." The silence on the other end was answer enough. "Ma'am, we show a balance of $43,000 that's been past due for 6 months. If Mr. Sinclair doesn't contact us within the next week, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action." I hung up with shaking hands and sat in my perfect kitchen, staring at the granite countertops and wondering what else I didn't know about my own life. That night, I confronted Randy in his home office, surrounded by the mahogany furniture and leather-bound books that were supposed to signal success. He was hunched over his laptop, tie loosened, looking older than his 40 years. "How much do we owe?" I asked, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed. He looked up from his computer, his face cycling through surprise, annoyance, and finally resignation. "It's complicated, Hazel. You wouldn't understand the intricacies of business finance. Try me." He closed his laptop slowly, buying time. "Look, every business goes through rough patches. The market's been volatile. Some investments haven't paid off the way we expected, but..." "How much, Randy?" The number he eventually gave me was staggering. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. The car payments were overdue. Credit cards were maxed out. And that was just the beginning. He'd borrowed against everything we owned, including his life insurance policy and the kids' college funds I thought he'd been building. "But don't worry," he said, reaching for my hand. "I've got a deal in the works that'll fix everything. A consulting contract with a major tech company. It'll more than cover what we owe. You just need to trust me." I'd been trusting him for 8 years, and look where it had gotten us. "What if this deal falls through?" I asked. "What if there is no deal?" His jaw tightened. "There's always a deal, Hazel. That's what I do. I make things work." But looking at him in that moment, really looking at him, I saw something I'd been ignoring for years. Randy was scared. Beneath all the confidence and bluster, he was terrified that his house of cards was about to collapse. The next few months were a blur of hushed phone calls and mysterious meetings. Randy became increasingly erratic, snapping at the kids for minor infractions, disappearing for hours without explanation. Luna, sensitive to adult moods even at 9, started having nightmares. Jake became clingy, following me around the house like he was afraid I might disappear. I tried to get a job, but every position I applied for required references from my previous employer, the company I'd left nearly a decade ago. Margaret had long since retired, and the company had been bought out twice. My resume looked like Swiss cheese, full of gaps I couldn't explain without revealing how completely I'd let my professional life atrophy. "Maybe you could start with something part-time," suggested my friend Claudia when we met for lunch at a quiet cafe downtown. She was one of the few friends from my old life who still made an effort to stay in touch. "Build up your resume again. Retail, maybe, or administrative work." "Randy doesn't want me working," I said, poking at my salad. "He says it would look like he can't provide for his family." Claudia gave me a look I'd been seeing more often lately, part pity, part frustration. "Hazel, you're 32 years old. You can't live your entire life worried about how things look to your husband." But I was trapped. The house was in Randy's name. The cars were in Randy's name. The credit cards, the bank accounts, even the utilities, everything was in his name. I had no credit, no savings, no job history, no way to support myself, let alone 2 children. And worst of all, I had no idea how deep Randy's financial hole actually went. That's when I found out about the life insurance. I was looking for our tax documents when I discovered the folder Randy kept locked in his desk drawer. The lock was flimsy. It opened with a paperclip I straightened out with shaking fingers. Inside were policies I'd never seen before, including one on my life for $500,000 that he'd taken out just 6 months earlier. My hands shook as I read the fine print. The policy was less than 2 years old, which meant there was still a suicide clause, but accidents paid out in full. I sat in that office for nearly an hour, staring at that document and thinking about how desperate I'd become. The woman who'd once felt capable of handling pharmaceutical marketing budgets was now considering whether her own death might be the solution to her family's problems. But as I sat there, another idea began to form. What if I could disappear without actually dying? What if I could give Randy the insurance money while giving myself a chance at a new life? The planning took 3 months. 3 months of careful research, of skimming cash from grocery money, of memorizing bus schedules and studying maps. I told myself I was just exploring options, that I'd never actually go through with it. But every day, the walls seemed to close in a little more. Randy was drinking heavily by then, something I'd never seen him do before. He'd always been particular about his image, but now he'd stumble upstairs after midnight, reeking of scotch and muttering about deals that had fallen through. One night, I heard him on the phone in his office, his voice pleading in a way that made my stomach turn. "Just give me another month," he was saying. "I've got something big coming through. I just need a little more time." The next morning, there were men at our door. Not collection agents. These were different, bigger. They spoke quietly to Randy on the front porch, while I watched from the kitchen window, Luna and Jake eating cereal at the table behind me. "Who are those men, Mommy?" Luna asked. "Just some people Daddy needs to talk to about work," I said, but my voice sounded strange, even to me. After they left, Randy was different. more desperate, more reckless. He started talking about moving, about starting over somewhere else. He mentioned relatives in Phoenix, business opportunities in Nevada. But I could see it in his eyes. He was running out of options. Lake Oswego has dozens of small lakes and ponds, remnants of the area's geological history. Oswego Lake itself is private, but there are smaller bodies of water scattered throughout the region. I'd been jogging around these areas for years, knew them like the back of my hand. I started planning in earnest after I found the second set of books. Randy kept his real financial records in a safe deposit box at a bank across town. I followed him there one afternoon, watched him through the window as he hunched over documents with a desperate intensity I'd never seen before. When he left, I waited 20 minutes before going inside. "I need to access our safe deposit box," I told the bank employee, showing her my driver's license. "My husband forgot to give me the key." She hesitated, checking her computer screen. "I'm sorry, but you're not listed as an authorized user on this box." Of course I wasn't, but I'd learned enough. Randy was hiding the extent of our debt, and given the way he'd been acting lately, I suspected he was considering desperate measures, the kind of desperate measures that might involve that life insurance policy. Or worse. I made my decision on a rainy Wednesday in November 2003. Luna was 9, Jake was 7, and they were both at school. Randy was out of town on one of his mysterious business trips, or at least that's what he'd told me. For all I knew, he was holed up in some motel, trying to figure out how to make his problems disappear. I drove to Lusher Lake, a small body of water surrounded by dense forest about 20 minutes from our house. I'd chosen it because it was deep enough to be dangerous, but small enough that a body might never be found. The weather was perfect for my purposes, overcast and drizzly, the kind of day when visibility was poor and few people ventured outdoors. I parked my car at the edge of the water, leaving my purse and keys on the front seat. Inside the purse was a suicide note I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, full of apologies and explanations that sounded believable. I'd made it vague enough that it could be interpreted as desperation over Randy's business troubles, specific enough that it would explain why I might have walked into that lake. Then I walked into the woods. I'd been planning this for weeks. I had a backpack hidden in an old storage shed near the lake, filled with cash I'd been skimming from grocery money, a change of clothes, identification documents I'd obtained through methods I'm still not proud of, and a bus ticket to Seattle. From there, I planned to disappear completely. The hardest part was leaving my children. I stood at the edge of those woods for nearly an hour, thinking about Luna's laugh and Jake's habit of leaving his shoes in the middle of the hallway. I thought about bedtime stories and scraped knees and the way they both still climbed into bed with me when thunderstorms rolled through. I thought about Luna's upcoming school play, where she was going to be a tree, and Jake's Little League tryouts in the spring. But I also thought about the life insurance money. $500,000 would pay off the debts and leave enough for Randy to start over. Luna and Jake would have a stable home, could go to college, could have the life they deserved without the constant fear that had been poisoning our household. And Randy would have to figure out how to be a single parent. Maybe that would change him. Maybe losing me would teach him what really mattered. Or maybe I was just telling myself what I needed to hear to walk away from my children. I walked into those woods and let Hazel Burke disappear forever. The first few months were the hardest. I'd taken a bus north instead of west at the last minute, ending up in Spokane instead of Seattle. I rented a room in a rundown motel using cash and a fake ID, dyed my hair black, and started calling myself Helen Brady, a name I'd chosen because it was forgettable, the kind of name that wouldn't stick in anyone's memory. The news coverage was exactly what I'd expected. Local mother missing after apparent drowning accident. The search went on for 2 weeks before they called it off. They found my car, my purse, my shoes at the water's edge. They found no body, but the lake was deep and the currents tricky. The suicide note sealed it. Another tragic case of a desperate mother who couldn't see any other way out. I watched it all from that motel room, buying newspapers and following online coverage with an obsession that bordered on mania. I saw interviews with my neighbors, who described me as quiet and devoted to my children. I saw footage of the search teams dragging the lake. I saw Randy, dressed in black, looking appropriately devastated as he spoke to reporters. Hazel was struggling with some personal issues, he said, his voice breaking at just the right moment. I tried to get her help, but sometimes love isn't enough. It was a masterful performance. He managed to hint at mental health problems without being specific, painted himself as a grieving husband who'd done everything he could. The community rallied around him, bringing casseroles and offering to help with the children. The insurance company fought the claim for nearly a year, but eventually paid out. Randy sold the house, paid off the debts, and moved with the kids to a smaller place in Beaverton. I learned all this from newspaper archives I read at the public library, hungry for any news of my children. That's when I discovered the true cost of what I'd done. The article was in the Oregonian's lifestyle section. Single father raises children after wife's tragic death. The reporter had interviewed Randy, who'd apparently reinvented himself as a devoted widower, struggling to raise his children alone. Hazel was the heart of our family, he was quoted as saying. The kids ask about her every day. Luna keeps asking if mommy is coming home, and I don't know what to tell her. But it was the quote from Jake that destroyed me. I think mommy left because she didn't love us anymore. I sat in that library and cried for the first time since I'd walked into those woods. My 7-year-old son thought I'd abandoned him. My daughter was waiting for me to come home, and Randy was getting sympathy and support from the entire community. He joined a support group for single parents. The church was helping with childcare. Neighbors were volunteering to coach Jake's Little League team and help Luna with her school projects. He'd found a way to make my disappearance work for him, just like he'd made everything else work for him. But the children were paying the price for my cowardice. I stayed in Spokane for 6 months before moving on. The motel room was depressing, and I was running out of cash. I'd found work as a waitress at a truck stop diner, paying under the table, no questions asked. The manager was a woman named Dolores, who'd clearly run from something in her own past. She didn't pry into my background as long as I showed up on time and didn't steal from the register. From Spokane, I drifted south to Boise, then to Salt Lake City, then to Denver. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning houses, stocking shelves, serving coffee to commuters who never really looked at me. I was a ghost, moving through the world without leaving traces. It was in Denver that I started writing. I'd always been good with words. It was part of what had made me successful in marketing. But now I found myself filling notebook after notebook with stories, essays, observations about the people I encountered in my new life. It was therapy in a way, helping me process what I'd done and who I was becoming. A woman at the coffee shop where I worked part-time noticed me writing during my breaks. Her name was Sarah, and she taught composition at the community college. She convinced me to take her class, then to apply for financial aid to continue my education. You have talent, she told me one afternoon. Don't waste it. Using my new identity, I enrolled in college at 28, claiming to be a non-traditional student returning to education after raising children. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had raised children, just not to completion. I studied English and communications, rediscovering parts of myself I'd lost during my marriage. I was good at research, at analysis, at crafting arguments, and finding just the right words to convey complex ideas. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually challenged and capable. After graduation, I found work as a freelance writer, mostly technical documentation for software companies. It was solitary work, which suited me fine. I could do it from anywhere, using just a laptop and an internet connection. More importantly, it allowed me to legally change my name and build a legitimate identity. 21 years have passed since that day. I'm 53 now, and I've built a life that's quiet but not unhappy. I have a few close friends now, a reliable freelance business that pays the bills, a small garden where I grow vegetables and herbs. I've never married again, Never had more children. I've built a quiet life, but it's a life with a hole in the center where my children should be. I know everything about Luna and Jake now. The internet makes it easy to follow people from a distance, especially people who maintain normal social media presence. They both look like me, but they have their father's eyes. In every photo I find online, they look happy and successful and completely unaware that their mother is alive. Randy remarried 7 years after my death. His new wife is a widow named Patricia, who had 2 children of her own. Sometimes I wonder if losing me was what finally taught him how to be a better person. Or maybe he was always capable of it, and I just brought out the worst in him. Maybe we were both drowning in that marriage, and my disappearance saved us all. But that's probably just what I tell myself to sleep at night. I've written this story down 100 times, but this is the first time I've been honest about everything. For years, I told myself I was a victim of circumstances, that I had no choice but to disappear. I convinced myself that Randy was a monster and I was a hero for escaping. The truth is more complicated. Randy was controlling and financially irresponsible, but he wasn't evil. He was a man who'd gotten in over his head and was too proud to ask for help. He loved his children, even if he didn't always know how to show it. And looking back, I can see that some of his behavior came from his own fears and insecurities, not from any desire to hurt me. And I was a coward. I was so afraid of being judged, so afraid of struggling, so afraid of not being able to provide for my children, that I chose to abandon them instead. The insurance money solved Randy's financial problems, but it didn't solve my children's emotional ones. They grew up thinking their mother had left them, or worse, that she'd killed herself because they weren't enough to keep her alive. I robbed them of their mother, and I robbed myself of watching them grow up. Last month, I hired a private investigator to do what I hadn't had the courage to do myself: find out if my children would want to see me again. He's worked with adoptees searching for birth parents, with fathers trying to reconnect with children after messy divorces, with siblings separated by foster care. When I contacted him, I expected judgment, but he was surprisingly matter-of-fact about my situation. "It's more common than you might think," he told me during our initial phone consultation. "People disappear for all kinds of reasons. The question is whether you're ready to deal with the consequences of reappearing." I hired him to do background research first, not to make contact, just to find out what my children's lives are really like, whether they've moved past my disappearance or whether it still defines them. I needed to know if reaching out would help them or hurt them more. The report came back yesterday. It's sitting on my kitchen table as I write this, still sealed in its manila envelope. The return address is innocuous, web investigations, but I know that inside are details about my children's lives that might change everything. I'm not sure I'm ready to open it. After 21 years of wondering, I'm terrified of knowing the truth. What if they're still angry? What if they've built their lives around the story of their tragic mother who couldn't cope? What if seeing me alive destroys the peace they've found? Tomorrow, I'm going to open that envelope, and then I'm going to drive north to Oregon and see if I can find my way back to the children I never should have left. I don't know if they'll forgive me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But I know I have to try, because some mistakes can be fixed, even 21 years later. And some mothers can come back from the dead if they're brave enough to face the living. The hardest part won't be explaining why I left. The hardest part will be explaining why I stayed away so long. But that's a conversation I should have had with my children years ago, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, it's a conversation I can still have with them now.